Hey friends, and welcome to the Girl Means Business podcast. I'm your host, Kendra Swalls, a photographer and educator on a mission to help you find your passion, power, and purpose through entrepreneurship. So let's jump right into today's episode because this girl means business. Hey there, and welcome back to the Girl Means Business podcast. We are officially in the month of October. This is easily my most favorite month of the whole year, not only because it's starting to feel like fall, at least a little bit in the morning and the evening if you live in the South. If you're up in one of the states where you get actual fall, I'm super jealous, but that's fine. But October happens to be my birthday month. So in just a few days, I will be celebrating the big 40. And I go back and forth between having mild anxiety attacks about it and being totally fine. It's just a number. Either way, this month is going to be a really fun, exciting month, and I'm ready to get started. So we're kicking off the month of October with a really amazing guest, Samoa Blanchet. She's a creative mastery mentor and a host of the Creative Mastery podcast. She works with creatives who recognize there's something more meaningful for their lives by further defining their desires and visions. She is certified in graphic design and realized she had a greater creative potential to fulfill when working with her clients. So the Creatrix Method is Samoa's signature program and a map that helps her clients collapse time and fully leverage their creative potential. I was really excited to chat with Samoa because, as you probably have figured out from this podcast, I'm a little bit obsessed with learning everything I can about why we do the things we do, what makes us tick, each of us individually, what are our strengths, our weaknesses, how can we leverage those, how can we learn more about who we are as people so that we can grow and become better versions of ourselves. So when I learned about her Creative Consciousness Archetypes, I was very intrigued and could not wait to have our conversation with her. She is such an amazing young lady. She is doing so many things. And the fact that she has created this whole sort of map of the conscious mind and how the creative brain works is fascinating. So I cannot wait for you to dive into this conversation as we kick off fall with Samoa Blanchet. All right, guys, I'm here with Samoa and I'm so excited to chat with her today because we're going to be diving into a topic that I'm not familiar with, that she's going to teach us all about. And I'm just really excited to learn something new together. So Samoa, welcome to the Girl Means Business podcast. How are you today?
I'm really great. I'm really excited to dive in.
Thank you so much for being here. So start off by telling us a little bit about you, who you are, what you do, kind of a quick journey to get to where you are today.
Yeah, so I call myself a creative mastery mentor. So I specifically work with the creative mind. And I started this by accident, actually. I started my first business in 2017, and I was a graphic designer, and then I turned into just doing web design. And then somebody asked me to mentor them. I was having a conversation with a fellow web designer, and she was telling me about a hobby that she had on the side. And I was like, oh my God, that's such a great idea. Like the thing that she had, I was like, this is so cool. This is like a multi-million-dollar idea. Why aren't you focusing on it? And she told me, she was like, I don't know. Like, I just never really saw it as that, but thanks. And I was like, no, like you should totally focus on it. And she was like, will you help me? And I was like, I mean, I guess I could. So I started coaching her. And 3 weeks later, she got her little tiny idea into the biggest subscription box company in her industry. Wow. And she also had like other smaller like subscription box companies like vying for her attention. So she was really excited and I was really excited. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. And she was like, yeah, thanks, bye. And I was like, okay, bye. And then I ended up like starting to market myself as that, but not fully. And I worked with a couple other people. One of them became a bestseller. She wanted me to help her with her book. Her book ended up being a bestseller, despite her publisher telling her that her niche was too obscure and it wouldn't become a bestseller on Amazon. That happened a couple weeks after we started working together. Yeah, so I worked with lots of people since then. And I just kind of started coaching because I realized I was really good at it and people were getting really great results. But I mostly focused on business coaching until one day I was creating a sales webinar type thing. And I started thinking about the creative mind and how powerful it is and how it's actually a much more powerful tool than we give it credit for. And I realized that that was actually what was creating all the results my clients were creating, and not not what I thought, not the strategies and the systems I was teaching, but actually that. And so I was like, well, how does this work? Like, why? Because that's where my brain always goes. And I ended up creating this entire map. That's what I call it. It's a map of the creative mind and how it works and how it can be leveraged and how our lack of understanding of it actually limits us from accessing our fullest potential. And now I'm here teaching you all about it.
That's amazing. So you don't have like any like background in psychology or anything like that. This is all just kind of comes from your own experience.
Yeah. So I've always had an interest in psychology. I almost went to school for it, but then went into design because I saw myself as more of a creative than a scientist. Now I'm saying they're kind of the same thing. And so, yeah, so I've always been interested in it. And I always I guess more like self-taught, would read things about it, but I don't have any formal training in psychology.
Yeah, that's something psychology has always interested me as well. Like, I think the idea of understanding why we do the things we do, why we are the way we, like, that just fascinates me. So I'm kind of the same way. Like, I never considered psychology in school because that seemed so far-fetched for me. But the older I get and the more I get into business and marketing and sales and the creative process, I can see exactly kind of what led you to what you created, because that's so true. Like, I don't know, you're kind of self-taught, but in something you're really passionate about, but you're able to apply it to what you're working on and doing right then. That makes it way more impactful than just something in a textbook you learned in a class somewhere.
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt. I was like, I'm actually glad I've learned it from experience and working with the people I've worked with over like some textbook that I was reading for 4 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So this is when I first heard about you and what you do. I was super intrigued. So I was like, I love, and this is going to sound really cheesy, I love like the idea of like archetypes. And I love the idea of like not necessarily putting yourself into a category or a box, but like I'm really into like the Enneagram and all that kind of stuff. Like, again, it goes back to understanding who we are and what makes us tick and how, like, what processes go into the way we think and the way we view the world. And so you came up with the 4 creative conscious archetypes. So can you kind of first walk us through like could you describe it a little bit as like a map of the creative mind, but can you sort of break that down a little bit more for us?
Yes, of course. So before I go into it, I want to address what you said. The whole point of this process is to actually get us out of the box, because that's what creativity is. So what I realized when I created this, I realized that people fit one of these 4 archetypes, where their personality, the way they make decisions, the way they see themselves, the way they see the world, comes from the perspective of one of these archetypes. However, we have access. All of us have access to all 4. And sometimes we shift from one to the other. Sometimes things outside of us will trigger us into another archetype. And the point of this work is to actually be in the center, because that's who you are. So you're not any of these archetypes, and you are at the same time. It's just a matter, because they all have their own strengths, their own weaknesses, their own unique perspectives. So what you actually want to be is in the center, which I call your creatrix, which is where all of your potential is, where all of your creative potential is. Because once you're in that space in center, you're actually able to reach out and grab whatever opportunities and experiences you actually want. Whereas when you're in one of these archetypes, basically whatever their strength is, that's what you have access to, which can be really limiting when you want big magical things to happen to you as often as possible. So the way these archetypes work, I'll introduce you guys to them. Therefore, there's the child, the novice, the parent and the authority. And I'm going to keep this as short as possible, but basically the child archetype is the seat of dreams and ideas and desire. So people who are more attached to their child are the dreamers. Like, they usually have these really grand, really cool ideas. They're very playful, very happy. They're just they're like children. Like, if you know anybody that you're like, oh my God, they have such a childlike energy about them, they're most likely have a very close relationship with their child archetype. And so that's its seat. It's really just about coming up with really great ideas. That's mostly what it does. Then you have the novice. The novice is, I call it's more like the seat of time, and like it's really about like getting things done now, like whatever you want. Like, it's like whenever you'll notice it's like almost like superhuman strength. Like, it knows how to bend time in ways that most people can't. So if you know people who are always getting out of like really sticky situations. Like, they're very charming. They're very like, people just, like, they just always get what they want, especially like in the moment. They definitely have a really good connection to their novice. And then the parent is like the super like logical, strategic, systems like person. So this is somebody who's really consistent, really by the rule, like does things like how they should be done. So the good thing about the parent is it can create a lot of stability, but it might take a long time to actually create that stability, which is a complete contrast to the novice, because the novice can create really cool things really quickly, but they're usually unstable and they don't last very long. So there's that. And then there's the authority, which is the seat of purpose and relationship and growth. So this archetype's focus is mostly around creating, it's really your purpose, like the thing that makes you feel like you belong here, like this is what you came on this planet to do. And it's really about creating harmony and like in your relationships, because our relationships is how we grow and how we really experience the world. So yeah, that's a brief overview.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay, I was jotting down notes as quick as I could. So I was thinking about what you were saying about like wanting to be in the center. So you're saying like we have each of these archetypes within our creative mind, yes, and we're kind of going into each one at various times. Is it one of those things where like we're choosing to go into that, or is it like, I guess my question is, how are we able to, control is not the word I'm looking for, how are we able to sort of manage when and how we use these?
So most people have an archetype that's kind of like their favorite, which is why I said, like, if you can think of someone who's like childlike, that they're most likely in their child archetype. So most people will subconsciously, unconsciously choose an archetype that they stay in. That's their comfort zone. And that's who they think they are. Like, that is their identity. So it's like, if you're like, oh, like I'm a really playful person, like that is your identity. Like, it's not an aspect of you, it is who you are. And that's actually where the danger is, because what we actually want, this is what I mean. It's an interesting concept, because a lot of people, and I'm still learning to even internalize it, we are all of them and none of them. And so anything you're attaching your identity to, like, that's where, oh, like this is where you're limiting yourself, because you're not actually allowing yourself to experience the full spectrum of who you are. So we usually have a default that we just default to when we're not being conscious about it. And then certain situations and certain people will also trigger us so that we go into other archetypes. For example, my mother, no matter how grown I am, always triggers me into my child. Like, I can't control it. Like, she's very good at it. She's very, very good at it. So like, I immediately feel like a child when I'm around her. Right. And then there are people who will like trigger me into my novice or into my parent. And sometimes it's because you are actually triggered. Like, so you end up showing I don't like saying negative, but I guess that's the best word, like negative aspects of the archetypes. But sometimes people will trigger you into your parent and you're showing the positive aspects of it too. So it just depends. And then, of course, you, and this is the point of this work, you, when you're with self-awareness and understanding, can actually consciously leverage an archetype. And that's very different than being in one, because you're not actually, it's kind of like trying on a suit. You're like, okay, like these are clothes that I try on for like this occasion or this moment or this purpose, instead of like being triggered into one where you don't have as much control.
Okay. Yeah, because as you were talking, I was like, I think for me, kind of my default setting would be the novice. Like I have always been the type that's like, I can get something done right away. I can get it done quickly. I have a tendency to be able to kind of make things happen when I want them to or when I need them to. But I strive for more of like that parent stability piece where like I can do all those things, but make them a little more stable and long-term, a little less volatile sometimes. So it's very interesting to me that we have a kind of, like you said, like this default that we sort of fall into or that we think defines us a little bit, when really the goal is to not have any of it define us. Because I would love the idea of being able to step back and say, that's just one piece of like what I can go in, like a toolbox. It's a tool I can pull from when I need to, but then I can put it back and pull from something else. So how do we get to that point where we aren't just running around in kind of our default setting?
Right. So the first step is self-awareness, which you're seeing. So like which is why I think the map is so helpful, because you can actually see which archetype you're defining yourself as and like you feel most comfortable in. Because then it's not actually going into the parent that helps. It's actually first detaching yourself from the novice, because it is an identity. Like everything that comes with a novice is an identity that you've embodied. And so your perspective of yourself, like, I don't know if you mind me using it as an example.
No,
but your
go right
perspective
ahead.
of yourself. Okay, great. So your perspective of yourself is that you are the novice and not the parent. Like subconsciously, that's how you see yourself as. So everything that has to do with the parent, like the stability and the consistency and whatnot, you're kind of like, oh no, that's not me. So just that perspective already like cuts you off from accessing all the strengths and all the gifts that the parent has, because you don't see yourself as that person, because you're so attached to seeing yourself as the novice. So what I do, this is where the work with my clients comes in, is I look at, right, because there's so many ways we attach ourselves to an identity. So it can be really overwhelming. So that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for the strongest, like most important ways you see yourself as your novice, how that shows up in the way you see people, the way you see yourself, the way you see your work, how you talk about yourself, how you talk about your work. So and the way I do it, I literally just talk, which is why at first when I started doing this, I was like, oh wait, what is my work? Because I was just like it's just natural to me. Like I just talk to people. Mm-hmm. And as I ask them questions and things like that, they start explaining how they see the world. And I'm like, oh, they're in their novice. And then they'll say something. They're like, oh, this is why I made this decision. Or this is why I'm going to do it like this. And I'll be like, okay. And then just point out the perspective. Because usually it's a limited perspective of whatever decision they're making. And so because it's limited, it's colored by the perspective of the novice. It's not coming from a place of all sides. There's like an attachment to things being a certain way or people being a certain way. And so it's like, oh, okay, well, this is how you're actually seeing it. Let's shift that perspective, because once you shift that perspective to a more neutral one, you can make the decision that's actually best for you in that situation. And it may be from the parent, or it may be from the authority, or it may be from the child. Because you may think, and that's the danger in like being like, oh, I want to be more like the parent, because you're like, oh, let me color my perspective from this other color. And it's like, maybe the parent wouldn't actually be the best decision maker in the situation for you, because it's really all about you and what's best for you.
I love that. I love that you said the limited perspective, because I always think of like, when you were talking, I was thinking of limiting beliefs. Like we all have these limiting beliefs that we think about ourselves. You know, oh, I can't do something this way, or oh, I can't have X, Y, or Z because of X, Y, and Z. And I like the idea of limiting perspective as kind of replacing that, because that makes a lot of sense. Is what you were saying is like, you are looking through the lens of whatever you think you're in, when really you need to detach yourself from that and look at it just from a clear, non-colored lens, and as kind of an analogy there. Because I don't know why I was thinking in my head when you were describing it, I was picturing like a color wheel where like the middle is white and then each little section's like a different color. And, they have that saying, like looking through things through like a rose colored glasses or, things like that. And I'm like, so when we're in one of these archetypes and we're making decisions, where our decisions are filtered by whatever the color is that we're in, when really we want to be in the center. So how, as like a business owner, these people, that you're working with, how do you utilize this idea to help them in their business?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
If you've been listening to the Girl Means Business podcast for any amount of time, then you know my love of email marketing runs deep. Not only is it a great way to generate new leads, but it's one of the most effective methods for nurturing warm leads and turning them into sales. Now, over the years, I've tested several email platforms, and my favorite by far is Flowdesk. Not only do they make email marketing simple and easy, even for the technically challenged, but they have everything you need to create stunning emails, capture leads, make sales, and automate the entire process, giving you time back in your busy day. And the cherry on top is you're only charged one flat fee no matter how many subscribers you have. So while other platforms will increase your price when you go over your pricing tier limit, Flowdesk has no price increases or hidden fees. If you're ready to give Flowdesk a try, click the link below in the show notes to save 50% off your first year. Let Flowdesk help you design emails people will love. Click the link below and check it out. I have a feeling you're going to love it just as much as I do.
I can use a recent example with one of my clients. So I have a client, her work is absolutely fascinating, very unique, very different. We've been working with each other for a while now, almost a year, I think. And so her work has evolved, because that's another thing that happens with my clients when they work with me. Their work, it becomes more and more and more and more unique and more theirs. And she got to a point where she was telling me, she was like, I feel like, first of all, she decided that she's doing something completely different. She's doing the work that she's doing, she's doing this business, but she wants to go into entertainment. And so we're talking, and she shared with me that she feels like her current clients aren't actually a good fit. She feels like she wants to work with somewhat people with bigger audiences, more like pop stars and things like that. So she was telling me, I don't think my current clients are a good fit, and I think I need to start focusing on working with these kinds of clients. And so from any coach's perspective, that'd be like, okay, yeah, let's do that. So who are these people? And da 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 da. But me knowing that her default is her novice. See, the novice sees some people in their novice see people as a means to an end. So, which is part of why there's volatility in the way that they do things, because it's okay, you came into my life, you serve this purpose. And then once you stop serving your purpose, next people that come into my life will serve that purpose. And so there's always there's always an exchange of people. So knowing that, that's probably her perspective. And that's why I feel like limited perspective is a little bit different than limited beliefs, because that's not actually when she says something like that, that's I want to grow. I want to create a different experience with different people. But we don't see that the limit is, I can't create this experience with the current people. I need to discard them and bring new people in. Because the reason the novice is like this is because it also, the dark side of it is intimacy. So it's I can't have too much intimacy with people. So there's a barrier and then goodbye, basically. So I shared that. I started asking her why. I was like, why do they need a bigger audience to like create this experience with you? Why? So I start asking her more questions, and she's going in and like explaining, and it all makes sense. And so I'm like, okay, well, why can't these people be like the people that you want them to be? And she starts explaining why. And I was like, that's a limit. Because you never even gave them the choice. Like you never like asked them if they want to play this new game with you. You just decided that they weren't good enough. You just decided that you needed to reject them, basically. And so we sat down and we actually like looked at all of her clients, and she realized that all but one of them would actually not just be a great fit for her work as it is now, as it has evolved now, but they would actually benefit way more from that work than what she was doing with them before. And when she saw that, because she was like, oh my God, because she thought her work was so different. And it is in so many ways than what they had signed up for, but it actually would solve all the problems that they were having in that moment with like the new perspective of the work that she had. So with that perspective, instead of being like, oh, I have to go create these entirely new relationships with entirely new people, she was able to see how the people in her circle right now were actually really great fits, and people that she could like build relationships that she could build on to also access the people that she wants to access. So she didn't have to throw everything away and start over and create more instability for herself. So yeah, that would be let me know that it answers your questions. Like that would be an example.
Yeah, I think so. I think it makes sense to me in the idea that, well, for one, it explains the need, in my opinion, for everybody to have somebody like you or a business coach, somebody that they can bounce these ideas off of. Because had she been doing this on her own, she would not have had the idea, the revelation that she had that these are the people. She would have gone off in a completely different direction. So I think just the fact that you need to have somebody who you can talk these things through is really powerful. I guess I'm thinking like, so just as someone who's listening to this and they're trying to figure out, okay, this all sounds really good and interesting, but how do I apply it to what I'm doing now? Like, when you start working with a client, like what's kind of the first process you go through with somebody into either figuring out where they're at or where they should be or how to help them?
Okay. So the first part is actually identifying, which is what you did like already, which is identifying which archetype you're working with, and which archetype is basically your default, because this process does not work without self-awareness. I can't do everything for my clients. I don't spend time with them 24/7, but when they're aware of like their archetype and like which, like what the archetype likes to do and how the archetype likes to limit them, they can do a lot more work on themselves too. So it's you want to have that self-awareness, and be able to do self-reflection. And then what I do, this is how I do this for myself, is when I'm making decisions, any decision, but especially like important ones, and this isn't just in my business, but in my life overall, I just ask myself, where's this coming from? Like, is this me? Or is this an archetype? Or is this like, for example, for a really long time, I had an attachment to my authority archetype. And I thought that was great. I was like, I don't have a problem with that. It helps me get everything done. My purpose, I'm growth oriented. My relationships are getting better. Like, yay. But then I noticed, and I actually didn't notice this on my own. I can't take credit for this. To your point about having someone like see you and like show you things that you don't see. My mentor noticed I had this attachment to being right all the time, which is one of the authority archetype's weaknesses. And because I had to be right, someone else had to be wrong. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And I had to be perceived as this authority and like I know everything and I know what I'm doing. But when you have an attachment to something like that, there's so much rigidity that comes in your relationships, including your relationships with your clients. So for me, like, and this is for the people listening, when you notice a pattern, it's like, oh, I need to be right all the time. And that's my authority. Well, what is the more neutral perspective that I can adopt around this specific thing? And so I chose to adopt the perspective that everybody's right, which was really hard for me because my identity was so wrapped up in me being right all the time. So it's like, okay, everybody's right. So if everybody's right, how do I communicate with people? Especially people I disagree with, especially people I feel are doing something wrong or they shouldn't be saying that. Like, how do I actually interact with these people? And it was so hard. It was so hard. But it actually, like, I was actually happier. And like things, like there was a lot less resistance and there was a lot less like BS when I was going through things. So you identify the archetype, you identify certain perspectives that are coloring the lens. So this one perspective was that I need to always be right. So whatever attachments you have, start looking at those attachments and then look at, okay, well, what is the perspective that's actually a lot more neutral than this? When you can actually see the neutral perspective, now it's just a practice. Now, every time you start, I'm right, or you get annoyed or angry or whatever, or you feel this need to like prove yourself, or you feel this, whatever. When you feel like a need to do something, you're just like, why? You just like check in with yourself.
Just question
why?
it. Yeah,
just question it. And then it's like, oh, okay, this is actually coming from my authority archetype. Okay, cool. Well, that's not who I am. What is the more neutral way to approach this? And then you approach it that way until it's no longer a habit. Like it's no longer something you feel like you need to do. A lot of people think like this is what I mean, why it's a little tricky, because we think it's who we are. We think that our the things that we feel called to do, or we feel like we need to do, or we should do, like that is who we are. But a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times it's actually coming from a part of ourselves that's not even us.
Interesting. Okay. This is so fascinating. Like, and I 1000% believe in like the self-awareness piece of this. I think that is just in general, I think in the process of me building my businesses and going on this journey of helping others, like that has been the biggest takeaway I think I've received, is learning so much about who I am and what really makes me like me, you know, and all of these types of things are so fascinating because it's just one more piece of like the bigger puzzle of who I am. But I like the fact too, that this is not something where you're saying this defines you. This is just something that is, you know, one piece of it, but that you like, I like the idea of stepping back to the neutral part, because I think we all believe that what makes up who we are is either good or bad. Like it's either a negative or a positive, you know, even when you look at like, I mentioned the Enneagram earlier, like they always have like your strength and your like your growth and your stress. And like, it's always black and white. It's one or the other. Whereas you're saying, no, sometimes we can just come back to sort of a neutral state and let everything kind of go around us versus us being in the chaos of it. Like go back to a neutral place and make decisions and plans from that place where you're not coloring it or filtering it through a certain lens. And I think it's a really unique perspective that not a lot of people have had. That's why I think this is so fascinating. And I'm just like soaking, I'm like taking on like, okay, I'm like still trying to kind of process everything you've been saying, because it's so good. And I've been like taking notes like crazy. But so if somebody wanted to learn more about this, because I feel like this is a much bigger conversation than what we could fit into a podcast episode. But if somebody wanted to learn more, or even to talk with you about this, where would they need to find information? Where can they go?
Great. So I actually have a podcast around this where I break this down even further. It's called Creative Mastery with Samoa. And it's on, I think it's on all the major podcast platforms. But the best place to find everything, so the podcast, the YouTube channel and literally everything else, is called the creatrixmethod.com. So it's the Creatrix, Creatrix method.com. And there you'll find like my newsletter, like just random thoughts I have around the creative mind that I share. And then like the actual like podcast and things like that. And also how to work with me if you want to go deeper.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'll have all those linked down in the show notes. And you're incredible. Like I should say, like listening to you talk and like you're so passionate about this. And I think it's so amazing that you have found something that really fits for you. I think there's so many people who are still out there trying to figure out like, what is I'm supposed to be doing? What's my calling in life? And you kind of have created this space for yourself that I think you're so knowledgeable on, you're so well spoken on. And I feel like there's so much that people can learn from you. So thank you for sharing this with all of us and for putting this out into the world, because it's something that I think a lot of people are going to benefit from. And I'm just super, super impressed to learn this from you and to hear you speak on it. Cause you get I can see, like, I know not everybody listening can see you when you're talking, but you get like so into it. It's so fun to watch you when you're talking about this, cause you can just see like you light up about it. It's so fun.
Thank you so much. Thank you for saying that. I don't know. I think it's something I think about a lot. And whenever I go into it, like when people have questions about it, and that's why I always tell people, like, whatever questions you have, like just ask, because it's something I created. I'm always discovering new things. So like your questions, like they help me understand it better. Cause it's like, whoa, there's so much. It's like a whole world. It's a whole different world that I'm also discovering. Like people are like discovering it. And I'm just like, hey, I'm just going deeper. So yeah, it's really, really cool to be able to explore it and share it with people. And so first of all, you asked really great questions too. So it really helps. And I'm really, really grateful that I get to share it with everyone.
Well, I think it's amazing, and just keep doing what you're doing because you're going to help a lot of people. So thank you so much for being part of the show. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks so much, Kendra.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. And as always, you can find any links or resources mentioned in today's show down in the show notes. And if we're not friends outside the podcast yet, then what are you waiting for? Come find me on Instagram at Girl Means Business. Send me a DM letting me know what you thought of today's episode or any of the past episodes you've listened to. You can also take a screenshot of today's episode and post it to your stories, tagging at Girl Means Business, and I'll give you a shout out on my page. I love connecting with you and hearing all about your business and can't wait to get to know you more. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will meet you back here next week, same time, same place.